Welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and today I'm going to be deep diving into Teen Challenges adolescent programs in Oklahoma. We have a guest, Lynn, who is a current student at the University of Michigan who is studying this topic and was also a participant in this program from ages 14 to about 16 years old. She's going to give us her first-hand review of what that experience was like and what her thoughts are now that she's done a lot more research and is a student studying sociology and is specifically researching this topic. If you guys already know about Teen Challenge, then you're in the right video because this is just the interview. But if you don't know a lot about Teen Challenge, or you think that it's great and aren't aware of some of the issues at some of the centers, then maybe you should go start with the deep dive video, which has the interview at the end. That'll give you the great basis to understand what we're really talking about before you hear Lynn's story, and it'll put everything in perspective. But if you already know what's going on, you're in the right video right now, so stay tuned for the interview and we'll just get right into it.
My name is Lynn. I am a undergrad student at the University of Michigan. My degree is in sociology, and I am about 1 year away from finishing my degree. But before that, I lived in Kansas, and I just I had a very normal childhood. I was very close with my parents. I was an only child. I lived in like suburbs of Kansas, so really not too much going on there. Funny enough, I wasn't ever really inclined into school or research or really like anything academics. But when I was about 14, I was assaulted. And after that experience, I began using a lot of substances and hanging out with a lot of people that would give me access to substances and just living like a very dangerous and self-destructive lifestyle. And it led up to me actually running away from home multiple times, but the final time I made it about an hour and a half away from my family, and I was just sleeping like on the street basically for about 2 weeks, maybe a week. I don't actually really remember how much it was exactly. After that experience, my family had already found Teen Challenge before I had run away, and they had already spoken to some people there, and I found out about it and I didn't want to go. So that was the biggest thing that led me to running away. After that 2 weeks, I ended up reaching out to my parents, telling them where I was, and they brought me home and they enrolled me into Teen Challenge immediately. But before that, I never really had a very specific drug of choice per se. I just had kind of an addiction to not feeling the way that I felt and not having to be sober through like the experiences that I was having. I was 14. It was right before my 15th birthday.
When you say your parents signed you up to go, that's not something that you really had much of a choice in. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. The decision was completely made for me. And it was one of those things where I was one of the youngest people there too. So a lot of the girls that I knew were like 16 or 17 and kind of close to turning 18. Some girls just kind of like were existing in the space until they turned 18. But for me, I was like, I'm not going to spend 3 years here.
What was it like when you went to Teen Challenge? I've seen some people saying that they experienced kidnapping like scenarios, and then other people saying that, their family drove them there and dropped them off. So it seems like there can be a
Yeah.
range.
My family drove me there. They were very adamant that they did not want to do that alternate route of having strangers do it. They decided to drive me, which I will admit was probably a really hard choice for them to make. And I just remember being like really mad at my mom, and like I didn't say a single word on that car ride because I was just so mad. But they told me that we were going, and we lived about 3 hours away, so it was a 3 hour drive just in complete silence. And then when we got there, I immediately went into the intake process, and they took my parents and kind of like ran them through, I imagine, just like what the like first couple of months would look like for me there probably. But I went in and I was strip searched, I was drug tested, and I was given an ankle monitor because I had run away before that experience. So they deemed me a run risk. So I was given about an inch long or wide band around my ankle and a battery that was about like yay big. They just kind of sat me down, and I'll be honest, I don't remember the exact conversation very well, but they were basically like, you're here. You can't do anything about it. You're gonna have a buddy, which is an older girl or just a girl who had like been in the program for a little bit, who's gonna like walk you around and kind of explain all the rules. But After that, I said bye to my parents, and I was told that I wasn't going to be able to contact them for 2 weeks, not by like phone, letters, nothing. So I said bye to them for that 2 weeks, and then my program started.
Being strip searched in and of itself, especially as a 14-year-old, would just be incredibly traumatic. Do you feel like you were prepared at all for that kind of an intake situation?
Not at all. My parents always kind of used it as a threat, honestly, like a disciplinary threat. My dad would like use it in the same sentences as like military school. So I knew it was going to be strict, and I knew that I wasn't going to be able to contact like my friends back home and stuff like that. But I did not expect to like basically walk into like what felt like juvie. I was really young and I was not sleeping very well, and I had like ran away, and I was like sleeping in my parents' room because they didn't trust me to like be in my own room. So I just remember being really tired and really exhausted and not really like taking in any of the information that they were telling me. And I was like sober by that point, but I was just exhausted. So I just kind of was existing a little bit and then just kind of like going with the flow. I did not have much contact with the administration. We were mainly in contact with our daily care staff. So I had like my daily care staff, and then I had like a mentor that I was assigned who was like a staff member that would basically do like your therapy, but not really therapy. They would kind of walk you through like these worksheets, and like maybe you got to talk to them about like your trauma and kind of what you were feeling and stuff. It kind of depended on who you got and just like what your relationship with them was like. I was really close with my first mentor, but she was very new. I remember like getting really, really close to her and kind of like immediately telling her like what was going on at home that had led up to it. And then she stopped working there. And so I was kind of passed around to a bunch of different mentors for about like 6 months or so. With our administration and like other staff, we had teachers, but they would just kind of like sit in the classroom while we did schoolwork on a computer. So they weren't really like teaching us per se. And then the administrative staff were honestly, whenever they would come in, it was just like a like shut up, don't talk. Like for me, it was like don't talk, just like observe, just like don't make yourself like noticeable. Because almost every single time they came in, it was either really good, like they were just in a good mood and wanted to say hi to us, or they were disciplining somebody and we were like all there to witness it. They were just like there to raise hell, basically, just like discipline someone, or somebody got caught with something and they had to be like their room had to be searched, like situations like that. It's when we would really see the admin. So you like did not really want to see them walking into the house.
What was the medical help like there for like psychiatric medications or anything like that?
I was not on any medication before I went in. In my opinion, I definitely should have been, but I wasn't. And so, in terms of like trying to get access to new medication, or like a medication that you like may not be on immediately, but you think would be helpful, that's like non-existent. There was no licensed psychiatrist. There was one licensed therapist, but she wasn't currently practicing. She was like the wife of the director, basically. So she like had that, but it wasn't being utilized. We didn't get therapy or anything. I'll say that right off the bat. We didn't have weekly therapy sessions. They tried to do group therapy at one point with like that one licensed therapist, like I said, but it was never really helpful. Like, cause also it would be a group of like 12 of us and it would only be like 45 minutes. So like we couldn't even really get into anything. In terms of therapy and stuff, it was non-existent. I had the mentor that I would kind of talk to about like maybe if there was like stuff going on at home, or I was just like having trouble adjusting and stuff. Or I would talk to my buddy, but even then we weren't allowed to like disclose our trauma really to other students, or like talk about what brought us there. It was weird. It was like you could, but you only could if you were like it was like a testimony. You were like using it to bring somebody closer to Christ, basically. If you were just like trauma dumping, that wasn't allowed. For me personally, I just kind of like shut down and kind of compartmentalized a lot of my trauma. And this is after years and years of therapy now, but I kind of entered a survival mode, really, where my trauma was almost like kind of shoved into a box in my brain because I wasn't in a space where I could unpack any of it and like delve into it, so I just had a lot of anxiety, but we never really talked to anybody. I remember there were, so in my research and kind of on my public platforms, I talk a lot about something called D level, which is the most like disciplinary level that you can possibly be on. So what I remember is seeing two girls in orange jumpsuits and not understanding why, or like girls sitting on the floor because they were on D level and not really knowing why. I remember walking into the house actually, and like the first thing I noticed was the discipline board, which is if you had sentences or you had a discipline assigned to you, it would be the number of them and whatever character quality they had assigned you to write out that many times right next to your name. So I remember walking by and just seeing somebody's name and like 100, 20, like just all the way down, or like just one girl with like 50 of something. But I remember just like a lot of stuff like that, just kind of pinpointing very weird things that like I didn't really understand. And even after they were explained to me, I didn't really understand. It was very clicky, I'll be honest. And this is something that like me and the girls, we get into this a lot now that we're older and we laugh about it, but like we were a house full of 30 girls, so it was very, very clicky. So it was very difficult for me to make friends whenever I first got there. So that was kind of another thing for me, is I remember just kind of looking around and seeing all like the little groups of girls and stuff, but like not really kind of being in them.
Did you feel, generally speaking, like safe there? Did you feel like they had your best interest at heart, or were you like, I need to get out?
I feel like I would flip-flop back and forth. I would have periods where I did feel like safe, but then I would have periods where something would kind of like disrupt that and I wouldn't feel safe. So like the easiest way I can think of to explain it is I remember in like my first month there was this one girl who had been, I think she was taken in from like a foster care group home or something like that. She was kind of one of the only girls I ever saw that just had like very physical outbursts, very violent and angry outbursts that aren't even really necessarily her fault. I remember her just being triggered very easily. Like you would just say like one thing and she would fly off the handle. And it got so bad one night that we all had to close our doors and go to bed early. And we never closed our doors. That was like a big no-no there. You do not do that. The fact that they had us like close our doors and we would just hear her screaming and trying to get her to calm down, it not working. I think they ended up calling the police at one point. So like we would hear her being taken out by police. There would be situations where one girl would like, where she would have a very physical or angry outburst, and we would all be like taken into another room or another part of the campus and just kind of have to like sit there and wait it out. And so when situations like that happened, it was obviously very unsettling. I had never really grown up in a place where I'd seen stuff like that. I hadn't gone to any mental hospitals before that experience. I had a relatively normal upbringing. So it was all new to me. For at least the first like 3 months, I was just like wide-eyed, like taking it all in. What the hell is even happening? The only kind of like therapy we got was discipleship. That was the only option. Most like, I guess, progress I would see people make would be during worship or during those very high intensity, high emotional moments, in which I also never went to church growing up, which I feel like is kind of important for my story. Is I was not religious growing up. My parents were actually very adamant that if you want this lifestyle, we want you to choose it. Teen Challenge was really the only option available.
Mm-hmm.
And the religious aspect, I know that they struggled with the most. That was their one thing where they were like, I don't know how I feel about this. For me, also just kind of seeing like if a girl was crying or something and having a flashback or something, just kind of seeing people going over to her, praying over her, but not really doing anything was very confusing to me and like very unsettling. I had never gone to church. I mean, I knew the basic story of Jesus and I knew the basic story of like Noah and the ark, and I think that was it. Never owned a Bible. I never read a Bible. In fact, I would go to theater camp in a synagogue growing up. I spent more time actually looking at Jewish texts, just curiosity and looking at their Torah and stuff than I would looking at a Bible, to be honest. I think for me, I never really felt in it. I never really felt like I fully believed, but I really, really wanted to, because the only presence of God I ever felt in my life was the absence of it. I constantly felt alone. I constantly felt like I was not seen, or that I was just, yeah, isolated and alone. So when I got into this program and I was reading the Bible and stuff, I'm a very artistic person. I love writing, I love reading, and I love creating things. So I would honestly, I feel like I would look at the Bible as like poems, honestly, and just like I would have lines or just like segments that I loved that I would be like, yeah, I can see why people live by this. Like this is a beautiful passage, but I would never feel the beyond, like the spiritual connection to it necessarily. I just felt like at most appreciation for the environment that I was in. I think that's the closest I ever felt to a spiritual experience. And when I got there, they're Pentecostal and evangelical. So there was speaking in tongues, there was laying hands on people, there was everything. And the very little I did know about religion did not include that. So I was very confused. I remember being in church and this lady like just basically screaming in tongues in like the middle of service. And if anything, I remember being annoyed, being like, oh my God, is that not so rude? Like, I'm trying to listen to the music and I just hear you screaming in the back of the church. I never ever really felt spiritually connected to it, but I really, really wanted to because that was kind of the only picture of healing that was given to us. And I really, really wanted to be healed. I would constantly try and try and try. I even got baptized at one point. And I think when I got baptized, I really, really, I was happy with it. I was in that decision and okay with it. But I think it was out of a hope that it would make me feel something, that it would make me feel connected. And it never really did. I just remember like getting up from the water and just kind of being like that was it. Like I was expecting this like spiritual experience almost, and I just didn't have it. Beyond that too, I would have all of these questions that I never really felt like I could talk about. And the answers I was given wasn't satisfactory. I couldn't understand why bad things would happen if there was a God. And I couldn't understand why they would constantly tell us that we were broken and that we were sinful and all of these things, yet like loved, like I couldn't understand that. Why would an all loving figure put words or feelings like that onto me? And my understanding was when you go into religion, you may not feel the best, but at least you feel held. You feel like someone's guiding you. And like even if you are in bad times of your life, they're guiding you into something better. And I just never felt like I was being guided into something better. I just always felt broken and I always felt like not enough. Now, when I try and go, or like the last time I tried to go to church, maybe when I was like 17, I just remember just feeling that broken feeling and not feeling any kind of spiritual connection. And if anything, just feeling uncomfortable and just wanting to leave. And I haven't been back to church since. I couldn't believe the literal, like that was, I could
Yeah.
not get behind the literal interpretations. And like even when I have because me and my father will have very in-depth spiritual conversations. And I love that. I love that about him. I love that we can talk about that kind of stuff. Even he looks at the Bible like a metaphor for how to live your life. And I respect that so much because I would be like, the earth is not 6,000 years old. In terms of contact with the outside world, non-existent. Me and my friends have a joke where if there is any meme or pop culture thing that happened from 2017 to 2018, I don't know it. It goes right over my head and I have no idea what they're talking about. And they will have to like pull up on their phones and like show me. And I'm like, was that in 2017? Yeah, don't know it. In terms of like the internet, or like we weren't allowed to listen to like non-secular music. So like all of that completely isolated. Like the first year of Donald Trump's presidency, I got a grace and didn't have to experience any of that. But like I wasn't able to talk to my friends, any of my friends. In fact, nobody was allowed to talk to their friends back home. I think maybe one or two people did, and those people went through like extreme screening through the program to like see if they were like churchgoers and like good influences. And those are people with like limited family contacts, so like they just wanted people. For me, I had no contact with my friends. Like they literally thought I died. Like I remember texting people after I got out off of like my old Instagram account, and they were literally like, what the hell is happening? I thought you were dead. With my family, after that 2 week period, we had 3 phone calls a week. So we would have two 10-minute phone calls. So one on Tuesday, one on Thursday. And then on Sunday, we would have 20-minute phone calls. My parents, they called me every single time. They constantly wrote me. I love my parents. I'm very, very close with them now. In fact, I live in their house. Like we have done a lot of work to get to where we are. A lot of that occurred in the program because of them. And they were constantly communicating with me, constantly talking with me, even when they weren't able to make a phone call, like one of my family members, like my grandma was calling me or something. And then we would get to see them once a month. It would depend on your level. So if you were an entry, like you were brand new, you could only see your parents for basically 8 hours and you had to stay on campus. And then if you were level one, you got to go off campus, but you had to be back by the end of the night. And if you were level two, you get to go home for one night. And then those nights increase with every single level that you have. My parents, I saw them every single pass. I talked to them very frequently. And that was really my lifeline in the program. That's really, I think, honestly, what got me through. I can't say that was the case for every single girl. There were a lot of girls who would constantly have missed phone calls or missed passes or just like not limited communication or limited effort from their families. That was honestly heartbreaking to see because we can't do anything about it. But yeah, no social media, no contact with the outside world whatsoever, and no secular media or music. And that was the one rule that my parents broke because we just have a love of music. So they would let me listen to like U2 or like Peter Gabriel and stuff on the ride there and back. Even though that wasn't technically Christian music, they were like, I don't care. But that was the one rule I didn't care about.
How long did you end up being there for? Did you know when you started how long you would be there for?
I knew I would be there for about a year. I really tried to work the program the best way I possibly could, and I would argue that I did. I made almost every single level on time except for two. I was never placed on D level because when you're on D level, your program progression freezes. Time basically is just lost. And so I was never put on D level, and I made my level progressions. And even then, it took me 15 months to graduate and get out of the program. So I went in when I was 14 and I got out a week before my 16th birthday. I remember I tried very, very, very hard to make sure that I could be out and like in the world for my 16th birthday because I really did not want to spend it in there. In terms of the programming, you don't question the program. You don't really question Teen Challenge. If you question your faith, it's kind of another thing that's kind of seen like as a personal journey kind of thing. Even then, none of the answers ever felt satisfactory. They would always say that you didn't have to be a Christian to graduate the program, but I did not see one girl graduate that program that was an acclaimed atheist. I did not see it a single time. And so it was almost, at least for me, I cannot speak for everybody, but at least for me, it would kind of start out with questions and just kind of not receiving satisfactory answers. You're just rebellious. Whenever I kind of got to a certain point that I just didn't really feel like I was going to get any answers, that's when I just kind of started faking it, just kind of putting on a facade almost. You had to submit in one way, shape, or form, whether it was to the program, to the staff, to God, whatever it was. It was essential. There was no other way to get through the program. Children are not seen as deserving of authority, and children who are authoritative or domineering are seen as rebellious and seen as straying away from God or just on the wrong path. So any kind of like authority or autonomy that we would really try to get for ourselves was denied. We weren't, we were told what to wear every single day. We weren't a limited, we had a limited amount of makeup. Every single facet of autonomy was stripped from us, and they would say that with pride. They would say that their goal was to break us down into nothing so that they could build us back up again. And I think a lot of the girls did feel broken down and felt like they had, yeah, just been broken down, but they were never really built back up again. I think I got through that program in one of two ways. I think it was a conscious choice I kind of made to like push my trauma back into the back of my brain. And it was a conscious choice I made to just do whatever I had to do to get out. If that was fake it and pretend to go along with the program and not cause any trouble. And when I did cause trouble, I didn't tell a single soul about it. And that was going to be it. I feel like every girl kind of reached a point, the girls who graduated at least, they would reach a point where they would just kind of submit to the program, to the ways of the program. And that was seen as success. It was seen as progress. Level one or two, they just don't want to see you rebel. They don't want to see you act out anymore. They don't want to see you talking about inappropriate things. They want to see you just getting along with the program. And level two, they want to see you get comfortable with that. And for every single level, you have to recite a chapter or two of the Bible as well. You have to memorize and recite a chapter of the Bible. You have to read a book. Of them, I specifically remember for level five, it was the 5 love languages. That was the book for that. I don't remember the rest of them, but I do remember that one. For level three, And 4, they wanted to see you taking a position of leadership. They wanted to see you keeping the rules of the program if staff wasn't around. So if a girl does something bad right in front of you and you are a level 3 or 4 and you don't tell staff about it, then you can be at risk of having your level dropped because they don't see you deserving of that upper level authority. Because when you go up in levels, you are gaining more trust, and more trust in that program also means that you are eyes and ears just as much as the staff are. And so when you reach like level 5, for example, you're basically on par with an intern. Staff will ask level 5s to watch the room while they go out and do something. Level 5s will assist them if we're out and about and doing something in Tulsa. The more you progress through that program, the more responsibility you get and the more autonomy you get. And like level 5s are the only ones that are allowed to go off by themselves at all. It's kind of like the more you step into this leadership role, the more autonomy you gain. So then the more you uphold the rules of the program to keep that autonomy. And then at a certain point, they'll be like, okay, you're ready to go home. Or for some girls, they wouldn't feel that they had a good home environment to go back to. And so, and then in that case, they would go and become interns, and then they would be staff in the program. They loved to put our trauma on display and put our testimonials on display. They would constantly ask us to take videos like with our testimonies, like talking about what brought us there and what it was like finding Jesus. I remember I specifically wrote a spoken word, which was my testimony, and the like the first half of it was my life before I was saved, and it was the second half was it after. And they would constantly have me perform that at like parent conferences. I even took it to like an arts competition one time. Anything like that is growth and progress.
What messages did they actually give you guys then about addiction or mental health or trauma or the reasons that you were there?
It was all the devil. It was all the enemy. It was all these evil spiritual forces that you were succumbing to or that were inside you already. It all came down to like some kind of demonic or dark force. It was always like this mystical thing. For the longest time, I never really felt like I had a concrete answer on my trauma. It was really just like the devil does this.
Did they recognize clinical diagnoses? I know that they really didn't treat them with medication or give you the diagnoses, but did they recognize it? You know, you're probably dealing with PTSD after an assault. Was it always just this spiritual approach and saying you're dealing with spiritual warfare or this heaviness from the enemy?
It depends. Like I want to say it really depended on the time and place. I remember times where I would have like a really, really bad anxiety attack and I would just need to go like literally just lay on the floor in the fetal position, and like they would let me do that. But then there would be other times where if a girl was like like if you were like profusely crying or having flashbacks or any kind of physical symptom of a mental health crisis, they would label it as like spiritual warfare. They would like start praying over you. I don't really know any girls that had very bad schizophrenia or anything like that, but I remember certain girls who just kind of had like quirks, if that makes sense. Like there was girls who, I heard did so much hallucinogens that they thought they could talk to plants. And so that would just kind of be like a quirky little hee-haw kind of thing. But like if like that girl that had the mental health crisis where she was having the violent outburst, like that was kind of the line. Like you could be freaking out, losing your shit, crying, and they would see it as spiritual warfare and like try and comfort. But if you ever cross the line to where you were like getting physical or you were like not like if they were trying to restrain you and you weren't allowing it, then that's where it would cross over from like assisting in like the spiritual aspect to like just straight discipline. We need to get you to calm the fuck down right now.
Okay, so it wouldn't be like we need to get you help now. You're out of control. You're clearly having a breakdown. It would be like
We need to calm you down. You need to calm down. Like you need to stop, basically. Like even to this day, I have like a hard time crying, if that makes sense. Like I cry in like very specific moments, like when I'm in my car, like times where I'm completely alone is only really when I cry at this point. I do think that kind of stemmed from there. I have one very vivid memory of this girl, and she just constantly had outbursts and things like that, and it got to the point where she was given an ankle monitor. And it was one of those things where again you would just say something and she would just flip off the handle. That was one of those scenarios, and she was refusing to plug in her ankle monitor charger. They like held her down duct taped the charger to her ankle monitor and like held her down while it charged, basically. So that's kind of what goes back to like the submission thing. It's like if you would constantly observe that, like if you don't go with what they want you to do, this is what it will escalate to. And they are not afraid to escalate it to that point.
So if you're having a true mental health kind of breakdown, which this sounds like what you're describing, they were, would that impact where you would rank? Like if you had some kind of a mental health episode, could that result in you being disciplined and losing ranking?
It could. It depended. Like if you were having a mental health crisis and you didn't feel like they were helping you or they were trying to just restrain you, you could be put on D level and your time could be froze altogether or your level could be dropped. By the time that you're at a level 3 or 4, they're expecting you to like not have those outbursts anymore. Like that's again, it's like the discipline, it's like the submission. They expect you to like control yourself basically to not have outbursts like that. If you do, you could get your level dropped. They would definitely, I saw it happen a couple of times, maybe not specifically with a mental health crisis, but where a girl would do something and they would drop her level as a result.
How did being in that environment shape the way that you saw yourself or how you see accessing help now?
I was in therapy before I was in Teen Challenge, so going back to therapy was not really a question in my mind. It felt natural. However, feeling like I was actually being helped in therapy did dramatically change. I felt like I would internalize and intellectualize a lot of my own trauma, but I like it's almost like I physically didn't know how to feel it anymore. And the only time I could feel it, it would be in the most like extreme and awful ways, like absolute breakdown kind of moments. And so when I went back into the world, I knew that I was changed. I knew I wasn't the same. I knew I had seen more than a lot of my peers, and I never felt mentally connected to my peers in high school after I left that place. I always felt older, more mature. I could never connect with people my age the same way again. That resulted in me kind of living my life in survival mode until I turned 18, because I was also under the constant idea that I could be sent back if I did something bad. And I didn't want to be sent back. For me, I didn't really acknowledge or even really deal with my trauma, even though I knew it was bad and I knew it was wrong, really until I turned 18. And that was when I had gotten my complex PTSD diagnosis. And that was incredibly validating for me because I got it from multiple people. And I was constantly invalidating my own trauma before that experience. I had completely normalized it in my own brain. Even by the time I turned 21 and was in college and talking about this experience with my academic mentor and just seeing the looks on her face kind of made me realize like, oh, I need to like do something with this. Like this is not normal. For me, it was healing was distancing, and my family didn't really want me to talk about it because they didn't want me to be labeled by it, and they didn't want me to be labeled by the worst experience and time of my life, and I completely understood that. And so I did it. I distanced myself from it mentally for years. I got to a certain point where that just wasn't enough anymore, and I had to get back into therapy and get with a new therapist that I felt like really understood me and who's actually specializes in children, funny enough. So she specializes in like a lot of the experiences, some of what I had. I am a very big believer in things like EMDR therapy, trauma-informed therapy, so I find it very, very helpful. However, I do know girls that have never really been able to go back to therapy or really open the door on those experiences and kind of continue in that state that I was, which is just kind of ignore it and move on.
What was a typical day like from the time that you would have woken up at the facility to going to bed? Did they have a pretty strict day-to-day routine? Did it change depending on what level you were on, or what did that look like for you?
Every single second of our day was scheduled out for us. We would wake up at around 6 a.m. and you would immediately have to get out of bed and get dressed, and you had chores that you had to do in the morning. We would be getting up and doing our chores for about an hour and a half, and then everybody would line up and go to breakfast, and we would go to school for about 4 hours, and then we would go to lunch and then do school for another 3 hours or so. After school, that was where it would depend. If you had a discipline, like you had done something wrong and they gave you sentences to write, you would go in another room where it was quiet and everybody would just be writing sentences. But if you didn't have those, then you would get free time. You would just get to go like color, play cards, read, really like whatever you wanted, really. Socialize outside if it was nice. And then we would go to dinner. We would have a couple more chores throughout that where like we were cleaning up dinner and stuff. And then every night we would have what was called I think it was PSLC, and I think it was personal study, or no, PSNC, personal studies for new Christians. And that was like a workbook that we would have to do every single night. We would have nightly devotionals where they would give us a chapter of the Bible and we would have to write a page about it. And if you didn't do those, you'd get a discipline. So we would do our nightly devotionals and then we would get ready for bed and we would go to bed. And that was pretty much our schedule, like Monday through Friday. Weekends, we would have like a deep cleaning day on Saturday, and then Sunday we would go to church, and then that was it. That was like the every single day kind of thing.
And what happened if somebody wanted to leave the program? Obviously, you guys were minors, so you guys had the
Yeah.
monitors on. But what if somebody was like really wanted to go home and really wanted to leave? Did that ever
Um,
happen? Did parents
oh
pull?
yeah. I could think of a couple of different, some parents pulled out, yeah. So that was always an option. If you could convince your parents, they could pull you out. Or there were a couple of different ways that could look. It could look like if yeah, so obviously we were not allowed to leave. If we just walked out the door, we would be restrained, probably be put on D level and given disciplines. So that was treated the same as like fully running away. Now for the girls that did run away or tried to, at least they would almost always be caught because we would have like bed checks and stuff, or we would just hear like these horror stories because we lived out in the middle of nowhere and we actually lived in an area that had like a very high rate of sex offenders. So I would hear these horror stories about girls who had ran away and had been abducted and like, had to be brought back by police. So like it was almost always like it's useless. You will be brought back and you will be put on D level. So don't even try. And then the girls that did try, that's exactly what would happen and you would see it. And then there were girls who would try and run away when they were at home with their families. And that would almost always result in them either one of two ways, either them being brought back and put on D level, or like maybe once I think I saw where like a girl tried to run away on pass and her parents decided to pull her out of the program as a result. But we were also kind of taught to see it as like almost tragic if somebody got pulled out. A lot of the time, there were one or two cases where I will admit I do think that some of those girls needed to be somewhere, like not where we were, but just somewhere. And so the idea of them being pulled out and just being put back into the world that they came from, it was like a very heavy sorrow feeling, and it felt like because also we couldn't contact them if they were pulled out of the program. You feel like you would never see them again, basically, like they were as good as dead almost, or you would have to make like very explicit plans to meet up or talk to each other outside the program, which also wasn't allowed. It was all involved with risk, and it was all involved with like if we get caught, it is going to be the worst thing ever.
How did people get treated if they didn't fit a Christian ideal?
I could think of a lot of different examples. First off, same-sex relationships are not allowed whatsoever. They can obviously cover it with just like no sexual contact is allowed whatsoever. So like of course same-sex relationships are going to fall into that. You were caught having a relationship with a girl, you were put on D level, and then you were not allowed to even be in the same room as that girl or like even make eye contact with that girl, or else you guys would get in trouble. When it came to that, a lot of girls still did have relationships. They just were good. They were good at not getting caught. But the ones that were caught were put on D level. A lot of girls, I know for me personally, I kind of really cemented the fact that I was bisexual in that program. Like just being around girls all the time really did kind of make me realize that I did like them. I was not raised to believe that that was wrong. So I didn't think it was wrong. This very weird thing, because I feel like they knew that if they said outright, like, you are bad for being gay, they would get in trouble by somebody. But they would say things like it is a life of sin and like you're living in sin. And like, so it was all of these negative connotations attached to being homosexual or to having any kind of same-sex attraction. In terms of, it was 2017. So, the idea of transgenderism, that was very much well known. But like in our cataclysm of where we were, non-existent. It just did not exist. Like I don't think I knew a single person that tried to display that, or even if they were just like kind of tomboyish, we would have to wear skirts to church. Like that was just part of our uniform, or like long pants or something and like a blouse. So like there was no like really clothes you could wear, or really things you could do to like affirm your gender if you were feeling that. In fact, our privileges were gender affirming things like makeup and hair care and pretty clothes. So like even if you were somebody that was experiencing that and didn't feel like you were in the correct body that what you felt, it's like our only reward system wouldn't even really validate that for you. In terms of neurodivergence, I think it was equally as misunderstood and ignored. For me, I have severe ADHD, so it makes it very difficult for me to learn in an online environment. I still don't do it as an adult. I avoid it at all costs. My grades definitely suffered. I missed an entire year of high school because I had no accommodations. I was terrible at just trying, I had no ADHD medication. I was terrible at trying to sit at a screen and do my homework all day. And so I basically lost out on my entire what should have been my sophomore year, and I came back into high school as a sophomore when I should have been a junior, so I lost out on that entire year of education. I didn't even really learn correct like biology and stuff like that. I could go on an entire rant.
To receive
Yeah.
appropriate schooling?
A bit of both. It was a online program that we did that was a Christian online program. I imagine it would actually be kind of the same program as what some homeschoolers get, but it was all through a Christian lens. So all of the US history, we didn't learn anything about like Native Americans or like I remember actually being kind of embarrassed because I didn't have a full grasp of what the Trail of Tears was until I was in college. And
Yeah.
I grew up in Kansas. Like that should not be a thing. And even with like biology, they would very, even though they didn't really talk about being transgender, they would say like, you know, there are only two genders, which I do not agree with. Or like in the world history books, they would start with like how God's formed the world in 7 days. And then they would just like jump to like 1650 or something and be like, okay, here's history. So that was kind of all of it. And kind of going back to the neurodivergence one that I do want to speak on a little bit, but I will try and be brief to protect this person's privacy. There was an individual that was severely autistic and it was adamant, like we could just see it, and it was they were not given the tools that they should have been given. They had a very hard time communicating, they had a very hard time socializing, and they would be ostracized by the girls even more because we were already in a very click heavy environment. And it got to the point where this individual, they didn't know how to properly like clean themselves, and they would just kind of be again like ostracized instead of like really, and it's tragic to think
Yeah.
of that, but like they should have been taught like how to do that stuff. They got to a point where they were drinking soap to try and kill themselves, and they responded to that by taking all of the girls' soap, like all of their roommates and their soap out of the room. So instead of really receiving help, their roommates would just be mad at them because their soap got taken out of the room. Like, why do you do this? You know, like no understanding and no compassion, just silencing and restricting, I think was how, and I think that if in the moments where they did have outbursts because they were having sensory issues or they were feeling misunderstood, again, it would be labeled as like a demonic presence almost. So they had to like go to the staff to get their soap, basically. Like they would have to like go, and like all the people in that room would have to like go to the staff individually and like ask for their soap. So it was, I don't, you know, I can't speak on how they've interpreted that situation, but at least for me, I would feel incredibly embarrassed and
Yeah.
incredibly like isolated even more in that situation.
How did your time end up wrapping up? How did it come to an end? Was it something that you were planned? It sounds like if you go through this programming, you kind of know when you're coming to an end, but it might be a little bit of a question mark.
Yeah, it's kind of like a question mark with an asterisk, you know, it's like maybe graduating in 2 months, like if I don't mess anything up. I graduated, I finished all 5 levels of the program. For my family, at least, I knew that that was the only way out. I knew that they were, at least as far as I knew at that time, they were not willing to pull me out whatsoever. So that was the only way out. So I finished all 5 levels of the program and I graduated, and it was a very emotional. I was very scared to go back into the real world. I remember a week before I left, I had left my towel hanging on my bedpost, and I got 120 sentences because of it. They told me if I didn't finish those 120 sentences in a week, I would be held there another month and I would have missed my birthday. So my last like week there was just spent like writing and writing until my hands cramped up and I like couldn't feel it. And then like my last maybe 2 days, I got like some peace and I was like, okay, I got that done. I can just like breathe now. I didn't feel like out until I guess my parents had me in the car and we were on the way home. But even then, I knew if I messed up, I would be sent back.
What was your emotional and mental state once you did leave then?
I just felt I felt free in a way. I felt like I had worked for it and I had earned it and I had done something really hard. And I think I did. I think I did I think going through that program and just the mental state I had to put myself in to do it, I think was one of the most difficult things I've ever done and ever will do. So I definitely had a sense of achievement by finishing that program the way that I did, but I also had a lot of fear, and I knew that I didn't feel resolved from the things that had brought me there in the first place. I never really felt healed. I just felt like disciplined, and I just felt like I'd learned my lesson, and like that was it, you know? But like even after I left, I left in like the summer. So I had like kind of a whole summer with my family before I was re-enrolled into high school. And when I was re-enrolled into high school, it was it was bad. I went back to almost the exact same things that I was doing. I did worse things than I had done, like substance wise, when I had gone back into high school than I went in before I went into that program. It wasn't really until I turned 18 and I could like breathe that I was a legal adult and nobody could do anything to me anymore, that I felt like almost like safe to progress in life. Like I kind of just felt like I was existing and just like this liminal space almost of not feeling connected with my peers, not feeling very academically inclined, not feeling very driven to any specific path in life. But just being out for and being in the world, that was enough. And then my senior year, when I turned 18, I kind of realized that with the way that my grades were looking, I was not going to get into college. And so that's kind of what caused me to like shape up a little bit and take my schooling seriously. And then I got into college and I realized I really did like school. And so that's kind of where my healing began, I think, is when I got into college and I could start to live my life again, without that veil of fear over it. I think is really where I started to kind of come out of that little mental box that I had shoved myself in for so long.
And how did your time there affect your relationship with yourself and your body? And then I know this is unrelated, but secondarily, also with your family coming back out after
Yeah.
having them send you there.
With myself, I felt incredibly disconnected from myself. It's something that I'm still working through with my therapist currently, where I have very severe periods of dissociation where I don't feel like I'm existing in my own body. I feel like I'm just like an observer inside the back of my head watching my body operate. And that's how I got through a lot of my days and weeks at Teen Challenge. So it's almost like anytime I have some kind of stress in my life or some kind of especially a trigger that brings back my trauma, my brain and my body go into like shutdown and survival mode. And I have a very, very difficult time getting out of it. And even with like partners and stuff too, it's very difficult for me to feel like fully trusting with people and fully like open with people. I consider myself very guarded and I have very strict boundaries with myself now as an adult, because I feel like that's just like what my brain needs to feel safe. And like the only people I want in my life are people who are willing to work through those boundaries with me, like make me feel comfortable enough to let some of those boundaries and walls down. With my family, I was very, very close with my family in that program. Like I said, they really were my lifeline through everything. My relationship before that with my family was not good. We were not in a good place at all. Just the sheer fact that we were able to work through that and get close again meant a lot to me for a very long time. But it also caused me to look at everything I did and everything I achieved as an adult as making up for the fact that I had put them through that in the first place. And that shame never really went away until I started to do my own research. And my family and I, we hit some disagreements. I think that we kind of always will look at that program a little bit differently. You know, I know that they agree that it's harmful and they agree that my research is necessary and they push me to make it the best that I possibly can. But I also do think that we will never be able to look at that experience the same way because they didn't live it. And I think coming to that realization was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do, just because I think when you leave that place, they instill you with a lot of shame to what you've put your family through and what you've put yourself through. So you spend a lot of time trying to unwork that and undo that even as an adult. So when you reach adulthood and you don't feel like every single thing you're doing is bringing your family joy or pride, it brings you right back to that dark place of when you were a teenager and when you were messing everything up. So that was a very, very dark place for us to get into. And I was very resentful, and I felt like I had kind of been transported back into my 14-year-old brain where I was just angry and resentful all the time. And that's kind of where my dissociation came in as well. So like it was a culmination of a lot of my experiences in the program that had affected the way I looked at my relationships and moved through my life as an adult. For a long time, I didn't realize that, but kind of through my research, it allowed me to kind of take a step back and look at my experience and all of these other students' experiences and kind of force myself to look at that experience entirely differently. My family and I now, we are very close, my parents and I, but I have had extended family like try and contact me about like getting other people that they know into that program or like giving information about that program. And every single time that's happened, I've felt incredibly uncomfortable and don't allow it now as an adult. It's almost like you live in two different realities of what you lived through and what you experienced and what Teen Challenge puts out into the world. And while you may see yourself in both of those, they don't connect. I think the way the medical community looks at it is they look at it as a disease of your environment, you know, a disease of your trauma, a disease of your options available. I think Teen Challenge looks at it as a disease of the soul. It's something that's deeply wrong with you and deeply wrong with the way that you are moving through the world and the way that you're moving through your journey with Christ. And it's even confusing for me now to try and like get out of that mindset. And it's something that I think kept a lot of people I know in the places that they were. And even after I went back to interview some of them, they would tell me that they did eventually get sober and make wonderful strides in their lives. But all of that was not for Teen Challenge nor because of Teen Challenge. I know people who got sober specifically for their children that were on the way and they wanted to give them the best possible life that they could. I know people that got sober because they wanted to go to school. I know people that have straight up looked at me in my face and said, I think I'm in a wonderful place now. But none of that is because of Teen Challenge. It's all in spite of it. I think that's a thing that a lot of us who get in these programs and get out and do make progress and strides in our life, I think we live in that realm of we're doing this for ourselves, not because of you or for you, you know. A lot of what I see in my research is a lot of these students have it's a multitude of things. They'll have traumatic experiences, they'll have life-altering experiences like close family members, close friends die, or they'll have like sexual assault or something awful, and it will kind of trigger a trajectory of substance abuse and harmful self-destructive behaviors as a result of their unresolved trauma and the pain that they're feeling. And a lot of these students will then go into the program very unconsensually, and then they move through the program. And in my research, I would realize that every single student would kind of hit a fork in the road where they would either try and defy the system and they would receive more trauma as a result, whether it was D-level or sentences or being restrained, whatever, and they would just keep down that path, or they would go down the other one where they would fake it and they would kind of play the game where they would put on a mask and they would portray the behaviors that they thought the program wanted to see to get them out, even though they don't resonate with any of that now, but they knew that it's what they had to do. So a lot of these students I would see kind of play this game or put on this act or just describe these experiences. And then as adults, when they're reflecting on those experiences, not only do they have very strong reactions in terms of the trauma that it brings, but it didn't equip them with any way to really deal with the trauma that they had before or after or during. So a lot of these students I will see enter maybe self-destructive periods for a time as a result of the trauma that they faced from that program, and then subsequently not have any tools to deal with that trauma because of the program, because praying only does so much, you know, and when you're only taught to pray about your problems and pray about your experiences and give it over to a higher power, but you're still left over with all of these horrible feelings and experiences. I think a lot of these students just felt lost. And I think a lot of them felt almost lied to, like they were supposed to go somewhere that was going to help them and they were only made worse.
What are some things that you think that people on the outside and just the general world might misunderstand about Teen Challenge, and specifically parents that are looking into Teen Challenge for their children? What are some things that you think they might misunderstand or should know?
I think Teen Challenge plays into this very noble image of these like saviors that are doing this truly great work, but they don't really show the horrible, horrible things that happen on the way to get there. I think a lot of it comes from also the limited communication. We weren't allowed to tell our parents how bad it was there, and if we did, we were labeled as liars and that we were manipulating, and we just wanted to get out. So anytime you would try and say something like that, you would just be like misunderstood. And so I think that not only leads to I think it leads to two things. I think it leads to a lot of people not speaking out because they'll just feel like they're going to be invalidated again, or like they don't even want to go back to that place in their life. And so that continues the cycle because nobody is speaking up about it. But I think religion can excuse a lot of things. And I think that Teen Challenge utilizes that to the fullest extent. I think there is a lot of cognitive dissonance that occurs that allows for people to dismiss these behaviors by these adults onto children in the name of like this image of something better. A lot of these kids, that better never comes. They just constantly feel broken and they constantly feel shame, but they are putting on this image of being healed. And so that image goes out into the world and it continues that cycle. I think it's important for former students of these programs to speak out no matter what their life circumstances look like, whether they are better now, whether they aren't better now. I think all of it needs to be spoken about because I think that just the picture perfect image of this kid that was addicted to drugs and then went into this program and is now in college or whatever, and there's no speaking about what the process was like to get there. I think it allows for a lot of parents to misunderstand or think that this program is going to do something that it's not. But I also do think it's about a limited amount of options too. I know for my parents, there was no other option. There was nothing else. Like every other teen challenge they had looked into looked far worse than the one that I went to. And so they felt that they made the best possible decision they could at the time. While I may kind of disagree with that, I do understand where they were coming from, but I think the lack of mental health options for one, adolescents in general, but two, adolescents that are dealing with substance addiction is almost criminal. I knew a girl who was in my program because she read romance novels. That was it. That was
That's
it. That was it. And
shocking.
she was from Alabama, and and that was, and she was the sweetest girl. Like we were all, even the staff was like, "Why are you here?" But her parents had the money for it, and yeah, she would be in a room with girls who had done things like heroin, all in just one space and given one limited treatment model of how to move through their pain. Had I gone into that program when I was 16, 17, I think I would have been a lot more rebellious than I was. But I went in there as a scared shitless 14-year-old. So it makes a lot of sense to me why I just shut down and went through it the way I did.
If there's anything that you could change about the program, or if your work could cause some type of reform, what would you want that to look like?
I want state oversight over these programs. They do not have any kind of state oversight, and that was very intentional. And I think it's what allows the harm to progress so much because there's no state oversight into these programs. There's no I it's a very difficult conversation because I understand people want to have religious liberties and they want to have the ability to treat people the way that they want to. However, if my work could do one thing, I want them to at least have a state law or a state obligation that they have to abide by to make sure that every single student is receiving the bare minimum level of care. And I don't think those students do. Would I like to see every single teen challenge that's for adolescents shut down? Maybe, but that's not what my work is trying to do. My work is trying to make it so that there is more, one, regulations and visibility in this topic. There is very, very limited visibility about teen adolescents and drug abuse, and specifically these Christian programs in the sociological research space. And so something that I was very, very passionate about is bringing these conversations into a prestigious and academic space because I think there's a lot of shame. And I think there's a certain image in people's minds of what drug addicts look like or what drug addicts or former addicts behave like. And I know I don't fit that image. I want to almost use that to my advantage to show people that we can get better. And that's not necessarily because of these programs, but it's in spite of it, if anything. I want to change a lot of things, but if I had to just focus on one thing, it would most definitely being just some kind of regulation and oversight on these programs. Because right now they're completely autonomous, and that is dangerous. Like if an adult is court ordered to go to a teen challenge, they understand the consequences of what will happen if they decide to not abide by that court order. Even though I kind of disagree with the fact that it should be a court order in the first place, again, they understand the consequences and they are consenting to that process. These students do not consent to this process. Most of them don't even know what's happening until it's far too late and they just find themselves in it. And that, in my research, I think is one of the most catastrophic things about Teen Challenge is that these students have their autonomy stripped from them from the very beginning. And that makes it very, very difficult to feel any kind of safety, but also relinquish any kind of control to a program, I think, without faking it. So word fast was definitely a thing. That was a thing. Word fast was you were not allowed to talk in whatever certain space they deemed it. I would say we were on word fast more often than we weren't. We were on word fast in line. We were on word fast in our rooms. We were on word fast during school. We were on word fast anytime there wasn't a staff member present. Again, we were allowed to talk less than we weren't. Staff members, if they wanted to, they could come up with some weird and unique disciplines because there's no guideline for how they should administer these disciplines. It really is just kind of whatever they come up with in the moment. Like I could see somebody on the board that they had to like run a mile for their discipline. Versus like I had one staff member who gave me 500 sentences because I called a group of girls assholes. There was no, no guidelines on that. D level was definitely the worst. That was no sitting on the furniture. You had different clothes. You couldn't talk to entry level students. But I think I think our diet specifically was one of the worst.
Diet specific to D level, or is that just for everybody?
Kind of everybody, but in opposite ways. For everybody, it was well known you were going to gain weight in that program, and that's something we would tell every single girl that they were when they came in, like you are gonna gain weight because like that the food there, it was very cheap, very carb heavy. It's just like it's gonna happen. So like that terms like and yeah, the diet was like not very good, but that's probably out of their control, whatever. As for the diet for the D level, that was something entirely different. So if you were on D level, you were not allowed to eat the same food as us anymore, and you didn't get any kind of like treat or anything really if like they had like a special treat that day. And your breakfast would be 2 boiled eggs, unsweetened, unflavored oatmeal, and your lunch would be tuna sandwiches and fruit and vegetables. But I literally saw girls just like eating a bowl of canned tuna and 4 slices of bread. And that would be like tuna sandwiches. And then dinner would be canned Chef Boyardee ravioli and fruits and vegetables, and then saltine crackers for snack. And that was it. And a lot of girls complained to their parents that they were not getting enough food, that they were constantly hungry. And they think the staff would just kind of be like, you get food, you just don't want to eat it because it's gross. And it's like, no shit, they don't want to eat it. It's disgusting. So that was the D level diet. And if you were caught giving a D level food at all, you would be put on the D level diet as well. Like we were also incentivized to like not give them food and not give them snacks and stuff, or else we would be put on the same thing that they were.
That is crazy. And that seems like it would also not allow participants to bond with each other and have support with each other, especially that to rank up, you have to tell on other people. It seems like it automatically, if I were new, I wouldn't want to be friends with a level 5 because
you wouldn't want to be.
They're
reporting. When you're an entry level, you probably still want to talk about what brought you there in the first place. And none of the upper levels want to hear that because they don't want to get in trouble. So and even in my paper, I think I write a little bit on that about how girls would get annoyed at the lower levels because they would feel like they were getting the rest of them in trouble. So there was most definitely a hierarchy. I think it really did boil down to like upper levels 3 through 5 versus lower levels, which was entry through 2. That was a very distinct thing. It was very like distinct if you went from level 2 to 3 because they would make it known like you're an upper level now, you need to behave a certain way or you need to do certain things. Like you're an upper level, we have expectations for you. And you would also have just like a multitude of privileges that you were used to by that point, so you didn't want to lose them all again.
What has healing looked like since you've left? You've obviously done a lot with your time, but what have you done to kind of take care of yourself?
For me, yeah, I definitely re-engaged with drugs after I left. I think a lot of it resulted from still wanting to not feel what I felt and also now a newfound need to fit in with all of the other people that were around me. For me, I think I hit a point when I turned 18 where I was just not really interested in substances anymore. I hadn't felt addicted to anything. I stopped drinking almost entirely because I also had another traumatic experience that occurred while I was drinking. So I stopped that entirely. At that point, I didn't even have anybody in my life anymore that engaged in those substances on a regular basis, just because it made me feel like I would slip into it. So by the time I turned 18, I kind of calmed down quite a bit. I engaged in THC because I had PTSD, so I had a medical card. And I do think that I still have very addictive habits and a very addictive personality. And so I think I definitely use THC as a crutch in certain points of my life. And it's very, very difficult to get me out of that. It's like my periods of disassociation, I will lean on to THC more. I don't really have tools for how to get out of that except for like kind of self-determination and support from my friends and family. But I know a lot of people who slipped back into harder drugs. I will speak about one person's experience. They had left the program when they were 18, because that's another thing. If you're 18, you can leave, but you walk out the doors with nothing. You don't have any of your stuff. You don't have no money. They don't give you a phone call. They don't give you a ride to town, nothing. You just walk out the door. So this very specific girl, I watched her just walk out the door, and I never saw her again. And I had the opportunity to interview them again. And they told me that after that experience, literally minutes later, they were picked up by strangers off the side of the road, and they engaged in meth for the very first time in their life. And they were eventually roped into escorting, and they were eventually taken over state lines without their IDs. And they were just invested in a life of escorting and drug use until they got pregnant and they decided to get sober for their child. And now they have a very, very successful career, and they've done a lot of work for themselves. But that person directly did more substances and experienced a worse life than they would have if they were not in Teen Challenge. That is one of the very few experiences in my research where there is a direct correlation to it. I'll say two things. I think if I had to say something for parents, just with how close I am with my parents now, I know firsthand how terrifying it is when your child is putting themselves in life-risking situations and you just want to do whatever you can to get them out of it. There's a quote that I really like that has to do with suicide, funny enough, but it's about forcing this person to be alive versus giving them a life worth living. And I don't think Teen Challenge gives them a life worth living. And I think that explains a lot of what these kids feel. And I think parents need to do equally as much work as their kids do. And I think that's a big misunderstanding of these places, is they think it's somewhere they can just shove their kid to get better and they don't have to do any internal work themselves. The reason why I'm so close with my parents now is because they did a lot of work on their own while I was in that program. And I felt like they were as much different people as I was when I left that program. Another thing is that there is a girl who passed away in a Teen Challenge in Florida, and I think her name deserves to be everywhere that it possibly can. Teen Challenge has a non-arbitration clause, so her family can't sue Teen Challenge, and they've been very outspoken about how their daughter should not have died in that facility. And everything I do, I try and at least make some kind of dedication or acknowledgement to her, because yeah, she died because of medical negligence in Teen Challenge, and that should have never happened.
Is there anything else that you want people to know, or is there anywhere that they can find you if people are watching this and they're like, we would love to contribute to your research? Is that something that you'd be interested in? Or
Yeah. Yeah, I'll give you my Instagram and my TikTok, just because a lot of it is like, if anybody wants me to, like, if anybody just wanted to learn more about it, I talk about it a lot on my TikTok, and then I'm just very easily reachable through my Instagram.
so that's the interview. I want to say thank you so much to Lynn for being willing to share her story. It's obviously very personal, and Lynn was very vulnerable with us to share this story, and I think that it is really impactful, and I think it will make an impact, and I hope the word continues to get out about programs that are doing harm to the participants and to the students, and so that changes can be made. Lynn said, is the goal for all of them to be shut down? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe there is a way for there to be reform. Maybe there is a way for people to go in and have a different and better experience. there does need to be more help available for adolescents and teenagers, especially those struggling with mental health problems, trauma, or substance use disorders. It is so hard to find help for your kids, especially long term. The best bet right now is to try to get your kids a bed at the psych hospital, and most of the times they don't have one. They won't take your kid, and if they do, it's for like a day. People need help, and kids out there need real assistance, but they need to be in environments where healing is actually made possible, where help is actually offered in a way that makes sense for that person's journey, and where they're able to grow and find new ways of understanding themselves and new ways to cope with the trauma that they've experienced. The vast majority of addictions are co-occurring with other mental health disorders. So it's really important that that type of help is available at a minimum on these types of sites. Thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Please like this video if you thought it was interesting. Please comment and share some love with Lynn. I really, again, just want to highlight her and her bravery, all of the research that she shared with me. She's really doing important work and good work here. And so let's all just say thank you to Lynn for doing this, because it has to be triggering to continue to dive into work like this. Please subscribe, or make sure that you're subscribed if you want to see more videos like this, and I will see you guys next week.
I've been feeling really fucking ugly, so I came to watch a sunset, which made me feel better. Nature is beautiful, and I'm also nature, which makes me inherently gorgeous. It doesn't matter what I think.